All right. Good morning, everybody. Excuse me. We left off. We got to the end of the page on Daf Ches. Today is Daf Tes, Maseches Pesachim, new Mishnah, the second Mishnah of the parak, following up with going on the previous Mishnah. So the first word, top line. Ein chayshishin shema gira chulda mibayis labayis makom lamakom. We're not chayshish. We're not concerned that perhaps a weasel of some sort dragged the food from one house to another or from place to place. In other words, if you have certain areas, let's say, that were cleaned and other areas that weren't, and then you leave, we're not chayshish that perhaps an animal basically took chametz to an area that was checked or that wasn't checked. And then therefore you have to recheck it again, or from one place to another, or let's say it was a place that was established, there was no chametz eaten there, therefore that place would not require bedika, and now it does because it drags on the air. Because if that's the case, then you have to check every yard. You'd have to check, even from city to city, perhaps it can drag it there, and therefore there won't be an end of the matter. So therefore, in order to say that, we do not assume that if an area was already established to have no chametz or no further b'dikas required, we're not concerned that perhaps some sort of weasel, dragged the chametz there. So let's see the Zak the Gemara. So Tamdoi Chazinan, the Shak. The reason that we say that is because we didn't see it go ahead and take anything there. But if we do go ahead and see one of these rodents, if they do go ahead and bring the chametz there, then we would be concerned that perhaps the area now has chametz and therefore requires a new bedika. So why would you say that? Why don't you just say that the weasel, right, the same way it dragged it, it also ate it, right? It likes the food. So the same way, it dragged the bread there, it ate the bread. And therefore, there is no further reason to go ahead and do bedika. That the areas where Avdei Kachavim live are tamei, right? They are tamei. Why? Because we're concerned that perhaps they gave birth, right? The Avdei Kachavim, and perhaps maybe some sort of stillborn or a nathel, and they buried the stillborn in the house. And how much did they have to live there in order for us to be concerned that perhaps there's tumah there? So we say 40 days, because 40 days is the amount of time for the Yitziras Havlad, in order for the time for a Vlad to basically form, and therefore if someone has a stillborn after 40 days since the baby was conceived, therefore there would be subject to Tuma. And even though the person doesn't have a wife, right? The person doesn't have a wife, he lived there. Who knows? Perhaps a woman was brought there and she gave birth. However, if they lived there even for longer than 40 days, but it was an area that a chulda, right, this a weasel or a chazir or a pig is able to go there. You don't need a bedika there. Why? Because we assume that the animal went ahead and ate the flesh of whatever the stillborn was. So the question is, in our case, if we see it, right, we should say that if we see a weasel, that we should assume that it requires a bedika. But over there, if it's possible that a weasel was there, there's no reason to assume that the nefil is still there. So Reb Zeir gives his own teretz, right? He says no. He said one is a case of flesh, not a case of bread. But basar lamishayra. If it's a case of basar, then the animal, right, doesn't leave it over, eats all the flesh. However, belechem mishayra. But bread, they're very careful about their carbs, their carb intake, and therefore the animals, right, don't go ahead and eat the bread, right? Who says they don't eat the bread? But when it comes to meat, they're going to eat the meat. But when it comes to bread, perhaps they'll leave over. So the bread, maybe there is a reason that they bring over the bread, but not finish the bread, and therefore there could be chametz there. And Amar Rav, and Rav goes teretz hamai. So I understand what's the kasha? Bishlam hasam emor havi emor loy havi. Over there in the case, you'd say maybe there was or maybe there wasn't. And then even so, it's a suffix whether it was there in the first place. In other words, we don't know that vadai that the guy went ahead and buried his stillborn. It's a suffix. And then even and based on that suffix, there's even as a suffix of the animal there, right? Whether it ate it or not, it's like a sveika. Aval hach, in our case, the vade, the chazina, the shakab over here. If we definitely saw that the rodent, or went ahead and was in the area, so then mi yemer dechalte. There's only one suffix, right? The suffix is did it eat it or not. So mi yemer dechalte havi saklu vade vein suffix must be vade, and therefore it's a case of a suffix, right? Suffix whether ate it or not, versus a vadai that a vadai took, brought chametz in that room. So therefore, since you have a suffix versus a vadai, the suffix does not go ahead and alleviate the vadai. Therefore, you have to assume the assumption of the vadai, which is that there was vadai chametz over there. Now, the Gemara asks on that, I ain't suffix mitzvah vadai. And the suffix does not go ahead and remove a vadai, right? Vatani learn Brisa Chavishames Veniach Megura Malaya Peiros. We saw this case earlier. If you have a chaver and he died, it's a person who was a Talmid Chacham. He was very particular in his Shmir Mitzvos, and he left over a storehouse full of fruits. Even if it's the day he died, that they are considered to be. Right, that they are chazaka, that they were already, the Trumas HaMaisa is already taken from there, and therefore we're not, we don't say that he left Tevel. Rather, they're already considered to be Mesukanim, right? Because Chaver doesn't leave any of his stuff not fixed, right? The suffix musarin. But over here, in this case, why don't we say it's a vadai tevel, right? When produce is brought in, right? So they're considered to be vadai tevel, right? You have to go ahead and take Trumas HaMaisros. So and before you do that, it's vadai 100% tevel, and it's only a suffix whether or not did this person take Trumas HaMaisros. And in such a case, the suffix lo musarin, the suffix lo musarin. It's a suffix whether he took the ma'aser or not. The kosti suffix must be vada. Over there we have a case of where the suffix basically removes the vada. So you see that even there are times where we say a suffix can remove the vada. So why don't we say the same thing here? That maybe the suffix of whether the animal ate, maybe the animal did eat it, right? Vada. So my answer is Hasam Vadai Vadahu. No, that's not a case of a suffix and a Vadai. That's actually a case of a Vadai and a Vadai. The Vadai Ma'asri. That it's certain that the Chaver took Meiser. Why? Because Rabbi Chanina Chuzai. Damar Chanina Chuzai Chazaka al Chaver Shein Meitzi B'tachas Yado Davar Shein Mesukan. Right? There's a Chazaka that a Chaver does not leave something underneath in his possession that's not, it's Ein Mesukan, that's not fixed, and therefore this Chaver would never go ahead and have a storehouse of fruits, even if it's a day of, that he wouldn't bring it into his house and say, okay, I'll go ahead and take Trumas HaMaisros tomorrow. He would do it as Shas Maisa when he brought it in. That's when he would take Trumas HaMaisros, and therefore it's not a case of a suffix versus Vade, it's a case of a Vade versus Vade, and that's therefore we say that Vade he took Meiser over there. V-boy same, or you can say suffix a suffix. Maybe it is a suffix whether he took Truma Meiser or not, but it's also a suffix that they were tevel. Why? Who Dilma Meikora Amar Deloy Tavli. Maybe in the beginning it was not considered to be tevel. Kid Rabbi Yeshua. Like Rabbi Yeshua said, Rabbi Yeshua, Ma'arim Adam al Tvasa Umachnisa B'mutz Shalak Kadesh Day Behemta Echelas P'tur Min HaMeiser. That a person he can go ahead and do harama, right? He can bring it in, I guess, with a chaff still upon the grains, and therefore they're still fit for his animal, and therefore that's not considered to be a final product, and therefore since he brought it not as a final product, it will be pater min hamaiser, and therefore it's to a suffix. All right, fine. So that was that case. I just have one question on it, but all right, fine. I think Rashi maybe do it. All right, fine, very good. So now the Gemara attempts again. The in suffix might be vadai. What? And you can't have a suffix, right, to go ahead and take away a vadai. Now remember, the kasha is like this. In our case, we say if we see an animal, right, that our case is we don't assume that perhaps an animal came and brought the chametz there. That's why it doesn't need a bedika. But if there was an animal there, you wouldn't need another bedika. So the question is, why didn't you say that the suffix, maybe it ate it, removes that vadai that it was chametz? So now the Gemara asks again, "Vein savi moitzi v'dei vadai." For Tani, we're learning a brisa. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ma'isa b'shivchas shel matzik echad b'rimon. One time there was a ma'isa of the shivcha of a certain matzik right? Matzik was I guess, a certain regular person with power, and he was a Jew with his shivcha. And Rimon Shatila Nefa Labor, that she went ahead and she miscarried, and she put the Nafel right in a pit, right? The stillborn in a pit. Turn the page. Uba Kohen. And a Kohen came, and then the Kohen came to go ahead and check to see whether it was a Zachar or a Keva, basically to see how long she would be Tmeya for. And so he went over to go ahead and look, right? He went over the pit to go ahead and look, and therefore, if there was tuma in the pit, then he himself would become tamei. And the mice became for the chamim, and they said, no, this kohen is tahor. There's tuma inside, because we wanted to know zachar and a keva, but it was but with l'chayra, right? There was tuma in the pit. We just didn't know how long the mother would be tmeya. And that's what he was checking.
Rabbi, doesn't Tum only apply for a Jew if it's a Jewish nafel?
Well, she was a shivcha, right? She was his shivcha, right? So we actually had the case earlier, right? I was wondering, the case of the akum, right? We said over here, if a guy lives in a house, then we said there's tuma in that case, right? So we had the case over there. I'm just reading the Rashi earlier when we talked about the other chavim live in a house. Right, and an akum is they are matame even though with their misas afbaha l'rabanan, right? So there's machlokes over there whether they're matame in the grave, right? But over here it's a good question, right? So Rashi deals with that on Testament Aleph in the Rashi over there, right? Just saying that then akum is matame their misas and afbaha l'rabanan. Right, and the Rishon ben Yochai, even according to him, right, he holds that the kiva of the chavim, they're not matami mago masa, but he is maida that there is tumas ohel. So good question, but so back in this case, but the shivcha, right, is she was owned by a Jew, so therefore she is commanded in mitzvahs, and there are halachas that there would be a tamei, because once again, we're trying to figure out how long she would be tamei for. So obviously the halachas of tumah tara also apply to her. So we say over there, if it's aru, and the chum said this kohen is tar. Why? Right? Because they have weasels and other types of rodents, right, over there. And some sort of bobcat or something like that. They are found there, and all is because since the
Tosus says it's talking about a shivcha meshuchra, so it has a din of a yid, if I saw it correctly.
She was okay, yeah. So she was right. That's the first line of Tosus, right? He says the shivcha over here. It's not a proof to say that shivcha is matame beleda. The shem of the fine. Yeah, but that's also machlokes, right? So some say even to include a shivcha, even to include them in the one who was freed, and therefore they would have to wait times of tumat tara. So, anyways, so they said he is tahira. Why? Because the newborn or the stillborn, right, was eaten by this weasel. Over here, it's a vadai that she put some sort of stillborn in this pit, and it's only a suffix whether it's eaten or not, or dragged it away. So you see that a suffix might be vadai. So the Gemara answers, right? So he says, over there, and we say something must be vadai. So Gemara answers, and over here we see that it's a suffix comes, right, that it would remove the vadai. So Gemara answers, no. It doesn't mean that she vadai had a stillborn and then put in the pit. Rather, she did something. She had some sort of either stillborn or some sort of discharge that came out, and we're uncertain as to whether even if that qualified as a nefil, right, as something that would be matame. Vahavi suffix, right? It would be a suffix, it's two sveikas, right? Suffix, right? All right. In other words, and therefore it's a two spekas of air, right? It's a suffix and a suffix. So therefore, we don't know whether it was matami in the first place, and therefore, it's also we don't know whether the animal dragged it away. So therefore, since it's two sveikas, therefore they said we'll leave the kohen on his chazaka that he is tahor. So what do you mean that it was? We don't know whether it says it says over there we did it because we want to see whether she would be tameh for giving birth to a boy, or tameh because it gives to a girl, which is a longer tuma. Sachi kamar. So Leida im ruach hipila im nefelikia. So they wanted to know whether basically that she discharged basically some other discharge, whether a ruach which would not be matame at all, or if it was an nefel. And therefore, and even if it was a nefil, then to figure out whether it was nefil for a boy or nefil for a girl. V-boy, same hasam vade, or maybe you can say there was two vades. There wasn't a suffix. It wasn't a suffix. A suffix was vade. Kevan the chudo bardus mutzin sham vade guru bahishat. Or we can say that since there was weasels or there's other animals there, those certainly removed the tuma, and therefore since they've certainly removed the tuma, therefore we say that it's a vade she gave birth, but a vade was dragged away, and therefore the kohen would remain tahor. And he dishir misharia. So yes, it might be that it will leave some over. Migra mihas vade gurum bahishata, but that even though it might leave some over, but it certainly went ahead and dragged it away. So therefore, even if you say maybe it didn't eat all of it. So no, it does drag away, and therefore it would be a case of vadai being tahor. Now the Gemara asks, "Mi amrinan ein chayshin shema gerar cholda." And are you saying that? So if you go back to our Mishnah, right? So our Mishnah says we're not chayshish at all. We're not chayshish that an animal came, and dragged it to another place, which now requires bdika. But we see in a Mishnah, which I think is on Daf Yud. There's a Mishnah. Let me see if the Mishnah is there. Right? Yeah, there's a Mishnah. Right. So later on, we say after a person does a bedika, he should go ahead and put it in a corner, right? Put a betzina, put it in a special place that it can't be taken. In order they shouldn't require another bedika. So it says over there, you put in a secure location because if you don't put in a secure location, then the animal will go ahead and come and take it to a place that you already checked, right? Person does b'dikas chametz at night. He's still allowed to eat chametz until the next morning. So he leaves over some chametz. So he should put it in a secure location, because if it's not a secure location, then perhaps it could be. It perhaps can be taken to a place which is not which was already checked, and therefore you have to go ahead and redo it. So you see, we are chayshesh that it could be dragged around. So Rabbi Eloi Kasha. One is on the 14th. The other is the 13th. What do you mean? So bish the in a case on the 13th, in other words, when the bread is common throughout the house, then the animal will not basically take chametz, right? Will not bring it from one area to another to store it in another area, because there's plenty of chametz available. However, once the 14th comes, then there is no chametz, right? Other found besides the one he left over. Then matzniah. Then the animal would go ahead and move it to a private location. But Rava says it doesn't make sense, right? In other words, we're saying that before the bedika comes, right, certain areas don't need bedika because you never had chametz there. Maybe the animals, brought chametz there during, other times of the year, and therefore it requires bedika. So we say no, because the animals don't go ahead and drag it. Only on the 14th will they drag it, because there's not enough chametz found. So Gemara says, Amarava, v'chichuda navihu. What is the chuda? Is it a navihu? Is it does it know Shulchan Aruch? The other, the ha'ino, v'arbasar, v'loyapi ad orso, v'shayu metamra. It knows that it's the 14th and there's no more bread, and therefore, since there's going to be no more bread, therefore they're going to go ahead and hide it. Doesn't make sense to be mechalik that the animals are going to act differently on the before the 14th or the 13th or earlier versus the night of the 14th. So Amarava. Ma shemashaya nichu betzina shema titu chulda b'fanenu v'yetzarech b'dikarcha. No, it means that you should go ahead and put it in a secure location because perhaps an animal will come and take it in front of us. It's not that we won't see it, but put it in a secure location, not because that if you don't, we automatically assume a weasel is going to go ahead and drag it to other places, and therefore all the other places require a bedika. Rather, we say that if you don't put a secure location, that perhaps you might go ahead and see a weasel do it and move it to another area. And Tanya
is there a concept of bedika on Pesach?
What do you mean? That
meaning if you found that it did it on would you have to research your whole house? After on Pesach, sorry.
No, right. So no, but the truth is, because since you got rid of all your chametz, there is, even if an animal is around and it might move food from one area to another area, it didn't start with chametz, right? We're assuming, right, during the times of the Gemara, they got rid of all the chametz, right? There was no, there was no selling chametz. There was no, you put chametz away and you put in your cabinets, you lock it up. There was none of that. So the Gemara is assuming now there is no chametz anywhere for it to move. So even if the food does perhaps get moved, from one area to another, that was just matzah. That's kosher the Pesach food, and therefore there's no reason to be chayshish that after the chametz is all destroyed and no longer available, that there will be chametz available for an animal to go ahead and bring it into your home.
If you did a bedika before Pesach and then you found chametz on Pesach, then you either cover it or you burn it, depending if it's Yom Tov or not. You don't have to do another whole bedika, I don't think.
As we saw before, if you find, right, there's no reason to believe there's anything besides that, right? Because he did bedika before, and he also did a bittul, right? As we mentioned before, actually mentioned a little bit later today. So bittul, that will be done. And Tanya Kavasi de Rava, we also have a Bryce in support of Rava. Haroitz elechol chametz achar bedika. Ketzad yasa, once it goes ahead and wants to eat chametz after the bedika, what should he do? Mash mashaya necha betzina. That which he leaves over, you should go ahead and put it in a secure location. In order that a weasel, if he doesn't put in a secure location, then an animal won't come and move it to another area and require you to another bedika. All right. The reason why is that you should put it in one place is because perhaps he's going to go ahead and have 10 pieces of chametz and only find 9. In that case, he'll have to go ahead and redo bedika because he knows there was chametz and he doesn't know where the chametz went. So therefore, if you put it in a secure location, you're not going to go ahead and lose your chametz. Fine. Now, 2 dots. So teisha. So we say teisha tziburin shel matzah v'echad shel chametz. Right? If you have 9 tziburin, right? Tziburin are tied together, connected. You have 9 basically piles or whatever of matzah and 1 of chametz. Right? So you have 9 matzah, 1 of also achbar v'shakil, and you comes along a mouse, a rodent, and it takes from one of the piles. We don't know from which one it took from. Did it take from the chametz? Did it take from the matzah? But you can say, hey, there's 9 of one. There's 9 matzah, 9 kosher lePesach, and 1 not kosher lePesach.
Same as the case of the meat, the 10 pieces of meat, no?
I know teisha. This is like the case of where you have 9 stores, right? You have 9 stores, kosher ones, and a 10th is non-kosher, basar shachut, so piresh. So, and now if you have a meat that comes from one of the also akbar of the shakil, so hainu safe. So in other words, that if you have, let's say, you have 10 stores, right, which sell and piresh vazach bar v'shaka, and one of them takes a hainu safe. That's the safe. It says the tiny one in a brisa. If you have 10 stores, 9 of which sell basar shchuta kosher meat, and one of them sells basar nevela non-kosher meat, then this mouse goes ahead and takes from one of the stores. We don't know which one. Then we say the suffix is aser. Why is that? Because there's a special halacha when it comes to sfekas, right? There's kol kavua kemechzal mechzadami. Anything that is set, kol kavua, anything that is in its location is considered to be kavua. In other words, even though 9 stores sell kosher meat and 1 store sells non-kosher meat, if the meat was taken from one of the stores, right? The stores are kavua; those are set. So if it takes, we don't look at the percentages of stores, right? We don't say, oh, there's there's 9 stores, so the chances are, probability is that it came from a kosher store. No, you don't say that. Since it came from something which was stationary, it was considered to be kavua. So therefore we say kol kavua mechza dami. Therefore it's a suffix, and therefore we say sfeiko aser. However, if you found a piece of meat not in the store and it was outside one of the stores, we don't know which store, then we say halach acharov. Then you go after the rov, because then we say kol deparish meruba parish. Anything that comes from, that is separated, doesn't come from its area. It was found over here in this area, right? That is considered to be parish. That is considered to be taken out from its location, and therefore, once it's no longer there, then we say you go after the rov. So therefore, same thing, right? If we say that if the mouse went ahead and if we say that it took from something from one of the piles, so the piles are considered to be kavua, and therefore, since the piles are kavua, therefore we say it's a suffix, and we say it is considered to be usher, because kol kavua mechza mechzadami. Now, Shnei tzibur, and let's go to the other case. That was the case of 9 verse 1. What about 1 verse 1? Shnei tzibur nachas shamatz v'achas shachametz. V'lifneihem shnei batim, and there are 2 houses in front of us. Achad baduk v'achad shena baduk. And there are 2 houses in front of us. One was checked, one wasn't checked. We also shnei achbarim, and then all of a sudden 2 mice come in front of them. The guy's just sitting there watching, right? Achas shako matzah v'achas shako chametz. One mouse takes from the matzah, the other one takes from the chametz. V'lo yadina hai lahai oil v'hai lahai oil, right? We don't know, and the mouse brought into the house. So each mouse brought into the house, right? There was a chametz and matzah, and there were 2 houses. One was checked, one was unchecked. Now we don't know if it brought into that. So we still need to do b'dika on the house that was not checked yet, right? So if the chametz was brought into the house that needed to be checked, so then the one that was already checked is fine, because the matzah was brought into that house. But if it's vice versa, if you bring the chametz into the house that was already checked, you would need to do bedikas on both houses, right? So hainu shtei kupas, this would be the same case as 2 boxes. What's that case? Detani learned rice. Shnei kupas achas shechul machas truma. If you have 2 boxes of produce, 2 large boxes, one is of chulin and the other one is truma. Lifneim shnei, see, in front of them are 2 smaller containers, 2 saw of produce. And over there, echad shachul and echad shachuma, and those 2 are also, one is of chulin, one is of truma. V'naflu elu sarich elu, and one of the saw falls in the larger box, or each saw falls in the larger box. We don't know. Did the chulin fall in the chulin and the truma fall in the truma, or did the chulin fall in the truma and the truma fall in the chulin, and therefore making them both considered to be mixtures, right? And we say over there, and what happens next? Those are all mutter. Shani Aimer, because I say chulin, because the chulin in the chulin box, the naflu, the truma, the truma naflu, and the truma fell in the truma. And over there, we're talking about a case of that so the Gemara says, so we'll soon see why. So shani Aimer truma. So we say maybe over there only we say because truma b'derabanan, because truma is derabanan, as Rashi says b'zman hazeh, right? During after the Beis Hamikdash. All right, and therefore the truma is only derabanan, but the chametz deraisa. So over there you can assume that the truma and the chulin, because it's derabanan. But over here, how could you assume that the mouse took the chametz into the non-checked house and took the matzah into the checked house? Chametz is a deraisa, even bisman hazeh. So Gemara says no. Mi amrinu auto b'dikas chametz deraisa. Right? Who says b'dikas chametz is deraisa? Derabanan the deraisa b'tal b'yamasagile. Because as we said earlier, right, that even on a deraisa level, one doesn't do a bedika. He just does, he's mavato all of his chametz, then he alleviates the deraisa. He doesn't own anything because he made it all hefker. It's ownerless. He doesn't own it anymore. And since it's ownerless, so therefore the bedika is really only a derabana. And therefore, since he's going to go ahead and do a bittul to remove the deraisa, so therefore we say in this case, you can assume that the mouse took the chametz into the house that was not checked, and it took the matzah into the house that was checked. And we'll stop here. So tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, we will continue. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you.